afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first webinar of 2021. And this one is a little bit of a controversial one, pretty topical, and asks a lot of difficult questions. Discrimination and diversity in appraisal practice. Yes, so discrimination and diversity in appraisal practice. My name is Sally Carruthers, and I am the president and CEO of True Union. And this presentation should take maybe about 45 minutes, maybe an hour, depending how we go. A couple of housekeeping notes. You are all on silent. You should be able to hear me. And I won't be able to hear you. The simple reason is it gets really complicated when we start looking at having people talking at the same time, and there are noises in the background, etc., like my phone that just went off. So thank you for joining us. And the next thing I just want to say about this, I have done a lot of research into this particular subject. I just wrote an article for a magazine that publishes for credit unions and on this particular subject. And so the intent is not to be political or have any political opinion, but just to offer some facts and ask some questions and see if, perhaps this is something that we do need to look at in our profession. And if we don't look at, what are the repercussions of that? So please understand, I am not intending this to be political in any way. It is really just for educational purposes and just to learn something about our profession and where we are. So let's get to our first slide. As we all know, there is a comment right there on our URL. Race and racial composition of the neighborhood are not appraisal factors. There are many things that we, education that we have, the certification that we sign, that we are to be unbiased, not have any personal interest, and essentially not be racist. So our first kind of thing or reaction to any accusation of racism is, of course not, we're not. We sign a certification to say we're not, we're trained to say we're not. Or as somebody I know said when they were interviewed, I think for the New York Times article, no, we're not, we are just the canary in the coal mine. And I think that, as you'll see, that might be somewhat of a naive statement. And I don't think that racism or acts of racism or prejudice or anything else are intent. I think they happen, but you'll see some of the causes of it and what researchers have seen and found out. So open your eyes, open your ears, and let's talk about it. So, I post some questions right at the beginning of this webinar that I think we have to ask and really see what we can do about it. So, does racism exist in appraisal practice? A very good question. Are neighborhoods, the neighborhoods that we describe, defined by race? And what are the repercussions of race bias in valuations? We are going to discuss that. Something that you may not have thought about, but do we need to change our methodology? We're going to discuss the sales comparison approach and some of the repercussions of that approach. An important question are, what are the influences by other real estate professionals? We don't work in a vacuum, and we are influenced by what others do as appraisers, whether it is real estate agents or bankers or whoever. Then kind of related to this topic is there diversity in the appraisal profession? I think all of us can quite categorically say no, there is not. And we're going to talk about that. And there are, I think, reasons for that. And then what actions need to be taken as remedies for racism and diversity, all kind of touchy subjects for many of us out there. So um, a lot of the discussion on potential racism, discrimination, and diversity in the appraisal practice really kind of came from this article that was published last August in the New York Times. Black homeowners face discrimination in appraisals. It really kind of was a wake-up call for members of the profession, and it's followed up by other articles. It was not in a vacuum. It really was in the backdrop of the pandemic and a lot of social unrest. And so it kind of just kind of became part of that. But the article was quite alarming because it cited examples of Black homeowners receiving low appraisals, which were the result of overt racial discrimination. I think the main part of the article kind of cited a couple in mixed race couple. I think it was in Connecticut, and that their property was appraised. It came in lower than the neighborhood indicated. They went to the bank. The bank ordered a second appraisal, and they just decided the the I think it was the wife who was white would be at the house, and they removed pictures and things to indicate, that there was a Black homeowner, and the value came in higher. And this was not the only example. And in fact, as we'll see, there was also a Washington Post article that came out this month that showed the same thing. And what really got me on it, I said I've done a lot of research, and we'll go through some of that. But I heard from a chief appraiser at one of the at a mortgage company, a bank, and she described that was what she kind of grew up with. That people, she was a Black lady, and her family, if they'd had their house appraised, would do that. If they were going through a refinance, they would kind of remove pictures and things before the appraiser came in, which is kind of an alarming situation. Um, but also, the article did reference some serious research, and as I started to look at it, there was quite a lot of research, and basically, the research shows that homes in majority Black neighborhoods are likely to be valued at 23% less than near identical homes in majority white neighborhoods. So this did become a wake-up call for the appraisal organizations and regulatory bodies. So there is definitely, I guess, a focus on it. And then again, I referenced that Washington Post article, which was called For Black Homeowners, a Common Conundrum with Appraisal. At the end of the webinar, I will give you my email address. And if you want links to any of this, the research or the articles, please let me know, and I'll provide them for you. What this shows really is that racism in appraisals, or potential racism in appraisals, remains newsworthy. People are talking about it. There is increased scrutiny from both the state and federal sides. Both the Appraisal Foundation and the Appraisal Institute admit there is a problem. There isn't any ifs, ands, and buts. They both say, yes, there is a problem. And because of that, users of appraisal services will be looking for solutions. So they are aware, they know. That is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, FHA, as I said, banks, credit unions that we work with are aware of this situation. So a wake-up call for all of us. So let's look, let's take a step back to how we got to where we are right now. I'm a big history buff, so a little history lesson on where we come from. Um, the appraisal industry obviously is a key market player, right? Fundamentally tied to both the real estate brokerage and mortgage industries. I don't think we could ever kind of forget that we don't work in a vacuum. So we are part and parcel of a transaction. We are an unbiased part and parcel of that transaction, but we are part of that. And we are highly regulated, and we are highly regulated to be unbiased and independent. So, of course, that's why we all put up our hands and say, "Oh, we're not biased, we're not this or that," because we know how regulated we are. We know that we have to follow USPAP. We know we're licensed by the states. We know that there are federal guidelines for what we do. There are many things a host of things that regulate us and what we do. Our actual home mortgage appraisals go back to the 1930s to 1935, which when FHA first required that federally insured mortgages had an appraisal, something to value the collateral. And in those early days, and for many years, mortgages were handed out or granted um, based on neighborhoods that were kind of shown by these maps, these color-coded maps produced by the homeowners loan corporations. And basically, this criteria showed where the most risk came from, and that was usually in the black neighborhoods, and the least risk in the white neighborhoods. And so the high risk areas were red, and the low risk areas were green. And appraisers were expected to follow those neighborhoods and identify properties in those neighborhoods based on these color-coded maps. And we're going to show and look at some of those maps actually in this and see some interesting kind of corresponding areas with those maps. But it's that, we've all heard, you've done your fair housing classes, that is the old system of redlining. It's where it comes from. Now, in the 60s and 70s, the fair housing laws outlaw this. But it has been argued that appraisers still kind of identify neighborhoods in a similar way, although some of the names and the ways they do it, and of course the maps have gone. So there is arguably a legacy impact of redlining. And the problem with that is that low valuations, as we said, that if black neighborhoods are valued at 23% less than white neighborhoods, identical properties, it's less investment in those areas, and people have home loans denied. The biggest investment someone makes is in their property. And if people are unable to buy property, they're unable to grow wealth utilizing their real estate. And what we see is that communities fall into disrepair and their potential health hazards such as mold and lead-based paint. Never mind the fact that the lack of investment stops small businesses being created and all kinds of other factors that really can impact a person's life. So one of the most interesting studies that I came across when I was researching this was one that came out of the University of Richmond. And what they did was look at those old color-coded maps and then did a kind of interactive comparison between those maps and the cities and show areas of areas that suffered from kind of low life expectancy, where lending and investment had been cut off, and they had lower life expectancy and higher incidence of chronic disease that they identified as risk factors for outcomes from COVID-19. So that would be things like diabetes, weight, high blood pressure, heart disease, those kinds of things. So I want to kind of just do a little interactive look at that so you can see it. And I think it's a little alarming when you do. So hopefully we're going to link right into this map. We'll look at the maps here. Now, I don't know where you guys are, so I'm going to start right off in Ohio, because our company is based out of Ohio. Columbus, Ohio, where I lived for many years. On the left, you see the old color-coded map right there. Oops, probably get out a little bit there. And then you see the areas right there. That's on the west side. I think that's probably an area called the Bottoms on the west side of Columbus. And then you look on the right-hand side here, and you see these are high. This is a low life expectancy area. So I think it's really interesting that here we are. I don't know, this is probably 1950s, 70, 80 years later, that we have these areas, and they still correspond to areas of high incidences of disease and those kind of high risk areas. So I'm sure that you think I might have just pointed to Columbus, Ohio, because I know Columbus, Ohio, but I can look at any other area and hope, and I think it will show the same thing. I know that we have some folks from Tennessee, I'm sure. So let's look at Tennessee, Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm sure we have some people in Knoxville, Tennessee. Same thing, right there. The red-lined areas. This is where the old maps, the old red-line maps, and then from the 1930s. And here we go. This is the new 2020 map that shows kind of areas of high risk for you know, bad turnouts from COVID. So it is in many markets. I know, I think I looked at Illinois, East St. Louis. I know we have some people in St. Louis, same kind of thing. I just kind of pulled that one. Where else? Would I have people right now? I might have a few of you down in, actually back in Ohio and Dayton. Do we have one for Dayton? Right here. So again, you're seeing those same kind of areas. So yeah, it's very interesting. And if you guys are interested in this, I can send that right to you, and you know, send you that link so that you can see more of that. Okay, so we talked about neighborhoods, and let me just move that off a little bit, get everybody shrunk a little bit on there. So neighborhoods and the sales comparison approach. So one of the things I found very interesting in the research was that they blame they don't blame appraisers necessarily. They don't blame appraisers for discrimination or low valuations in Black neighborhoods. They look at the issue being the sales comparison approach. And even though we do not define our neighborhoods with color-coded maps, we still define a neighborhood. And essentially, you know, the empirical evidence suggests that this process, this sales comparison process, can create some, you know, what they call opportunities for perceptions, racialized perceptions of neighborhoods. So, because we define these neighborhoods, they're saying that definition and the separation of those um, can cause the low valuations. And when I looked into it, I think what I see is that in our appraisals, we kind of apply this suburban mindset into all appraising, whether it's rural or it's urban. And it really is the sales comparison approach. And I think there's a potential for issues when you take it out of that suburban neighborhood. Works great if you're in a subdivision in a suburban neighborhood and you got three sales that are down the street or 2 blocks over or whatever it is, and that's great. We kind of know what the value is. But when you get into urban areas or even rural areas, I would argue. I think that there are potentials for discrimination in that process. And even now, we don't call these black areas poor neighborhoods, or we don't talk about pride of ownership, but we still refer to them as low value areas. So becomes something that moves on through the years. And we're going to show that although you would think that things have got better because we do have fair housing legislation, in fact, they've got worse. And some of that might be kind of perpetrated through the way that we do appraisals, not the over racism, but just the process that we go through. And it's kind of interesting that, of course, a lot of these researchers, all these researchers, that the city planners and whatever, that they're not appraisers. So they say, well, throw out the sales comparison approach and use the cost approach. And I'm like, do you see that you still have to use the sales comparison approach, probably in the cost approach? And we still got to figure out depreciation and how do you value urban sites. And so it's not as simple as that their solutions. But I think we will move to a different type of solution at some point. Um, so one of the studies I looked at was this one. And as I said, we all think that things are going to get better, or they have got better. I mean, we have legislation. We're all very aware of it. Appraisers have education. So this actual research came out in September of last year. And it's called the Increasing Effect of Neighborhood Racial Composition on Home Values. And what it suggests is that the disparity between home values in black and white neighborhoods has in fact increased over the years. And they firmly put that, I mean, their real conclusion on this is that contemporary appraisal practice, this suburban way of looking at this, using the sales comparison approach, contributes to the ongoing inequality. And I think it's a very interesting, it's interesting research because they basically say that appraisers continue to use neighborhood racial composition to determine which homes are comparable. And I kind of, well, come on, I'm an appraiser, right? I know how things go. But I think that I don't know that it is a conscious effort, but I think there are contributing factors, and the sales comparison approach could be one of the things that is has some faults here. And especially when you see the figures. So, what they say is that across majority black neighborhoods, owner-occupied homes are estimated to be undervalued by approximately 48,000 per house. So if you took um, identical homes and you took one from a black neighborhood and you took one from a white neighborhood, the one in the black neighborhood will be, on average, $48,000 left. And I got thinking about this, and I thought, at first I thought, well, that seems really high. And then I thought about areas I knew, and I thought, well, okay, if I'm in an area and it's predominantly black neighborhood and the house is worth $80,000, the same house might be worth 128,000 or even more in a white neighborhood. And there are all kinds of other factors, but what they're saying is this, if you accumulate this, it comes to $156 billion in cumulative loss, and that's just on the real estate. Never mind the loss in investment and the loss in businesses growing up there or any other things that that are perpetrated by this. As a whole, I think only in this country right now, about um, 45,000 people, 45% of Blacks actually own their own homes, whereas 75% of white people own their own homes. That's a huge disparity, and that has widened. That is continuing to widen right now. Um, and why I say all this before we get into the diversity side of the appraisal business is that people are looking at this. They're taking notice of this research, and you guys will all be judged on this in some way. And so we should be conscious of it. We should know that at some point that this people are going to look for solutions, and you guys will be part of those solutions. And if you think that's not going to happen, that's okay, but I think it will. So I'm gonna want to switch to something that's obviously related to this, and that's the actual diversity in the appraisal industry. I don't think it's any secret to any of us that we lack diversity. Right now, 75% of appraisers are male. 87% of them are white. 4% Hispanic, 3% Black. This actually goes back to 2017, so it's actually that data is 3 years old. And what I thought interestingly was I took another profession and looked up percentages, and in comparison, in the accounting profession, 12% of accountants are Black and 60% are women. It was really kind of interesting. After I gave this webinar on Tuesday, I got an email from an appraiser in Virginia, and he says, "Sally, I'm one of the 3%, Black appraisers," and he pointed out some things he had seen, and he said, "It's interesting what you said about accountants, because 12% represents, what yeah, I think it's pretty close to what the population is. That I think 12% of our population. I don't know that for sure, but he said that was about right. So I think we look at this, and we should be looking at more diversity in our profession. And we got better. I think when I started, probably there were less than 5% women in the profession. So there are more women. So we might have kind of taken a little bit, like, if you're a woman, that's good. But I think we have to work harder at this to be better representative of what the population is. So alongside this, we all know that unless you've had your head in the sand, that the powers that be are looking at the modernization of the appraisal industry. And you guys may not like it. I get plenty of emails. I think this week we sent out something about the modernization of the appraisal forms, and my gosh, everybody was a little upset. I didn't see it. I thought everybody would kind of welcome that, because we've been struggling with these kind of very clumsy forms, trying to kind of put a UAD format into them. They take ages to complete. They are essentially form filling, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to have something new? But lots of people thought that meant that they would earn less. I didn't see it that way. I see appraising as the practice of appraisal, not the writing of a report. So I thought it was, I saw it a different way. But there are obviously people that are looking to modernize our industry. It's long overdue, actually. Um, Back in 2019, nearly a couple of years ago now, the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Housing Community Development Insurance held a hearing, and it was called What's Your House Worth? A review of the appraisal industry. They looked at a lot of different things, and I don't know, I'm not sure that anything really came out of it. But one of the things they did address were potential disparities of home values in minority areas. They had a gentleman who testified there. He's from, let me get this right. What is his name? Sorry, it's kind of gone from my head. And Andre Perry, that's right. And he has done a lot of research on this. He's actually from the, where was he from? The Brookings Institute. He wrote a book called Knowing Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. And so he did testify at this. And at the time, he remembers in that book testifying and people being shocked that the appraisal community, the people in there testifying that anyone was talking about this. But I think things have changed a lot since then, and so I think this has become part of their dialogue right now. This year, actually, maybe it was the end of last year, FHFA, who are the governing, the regulating side of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, issued an RFI on appraisal-related policies, practices, and processes. And it talked about modernizing the appraisal process. And really what they said, to create a more streamlined and accurate collateral valuation process. And so they looked at a lot of different, they're looking at several different things. The UAD, obviously the appraisal data set, automated valuation models and appraisal waivers, and valuation differences by borrower and neighborhood ethnic makeup. So this is part of the conversation. You can look this up and provide feedback. It's due no later than February 26th. But I think, it's good for you guys to know that this topic is certainly there and being discussed. Last year was a very interesting year for all of us. Still under a pandemic, still working under a lot of difficult situations. And with that, we were incredibly busy. Low interest rates, record housing market, and then, a lot of other things, were going on. And I think there is an increased focus on the appraisal profession, and evaluation, and looking at streamlining the process, making it quicker. But don't forget that we are still needed. We are not going to be eliminated. I'm 100% sure of that. But I think that we have to be open to adapting and understanding that some of these things are going to be very important. So, I don't mean to be, kind of a doomsayer or anything like that, but, the people out there are looking for answers and solutions. And I think that will be, that'll come fairly soon. So some of these solutions to different things that I know of, and there are probably more. And one of them is the Appraisal Foundation produced a paper. It's actually only about a page long, called Grow Diversity and Combat Bias in Appraisal Professions. So they're looking for answers and they're looking for input, and I I don't know how that'll work because obviously um, how from their standpoint they deal with practices, they deal with our ethics, and they deal with our qualifications. So they're limited in some regards to what they're able to do, and whether they will put something on the states as far as education is concerned, or from a disciplinary standpoint. I don't know, but certainly they are looking at this, and I think that's long overdue. I think there have to be some major changes in the structure of our profession in order to allow diversity. And some of that I think really revolves around the apprentice kind of situation we have, and the way that we develop appraisers. It's I kind of explained it that you're a one-man show and you're doing quite well. Do you want to hire an apprentice? And then does somebody, a college graduate, want to come work for, somebody working in the basement of their home? So there are all these kind of things that we have to try and figure out. And there are probably people who are a lot smarter than me doing that. But be aware, it is there. The Appraisal Institute actually came up with this really interesting thing, Appraiser Diversity Pipeline Initiative, and they did this fairly quickly, and partnered with Fannie Mae and the National Urban League to try and encourage young people to get into the appraisal profession. So it'd be interesting to know how that goes. Another thing that is kind of floated out there that people have mentioned um, back, and it may have just been kind of part of the campaign rhetoric that comes out at any of these times, but the Biden campaign talked about national appraisal standards to ensure that appraisers are adequately trained and understand neighborhoods, and that they don't hold implicit biases. Um, I really don't know how that will work, or if that is serious, or if that was just something that was said. But it's there, and I think we have to be aware of that. Um, we really actually do have national standards. So like a lot of these things that we know our business in that side, but I think there will be that more of a look at that with what is happening right now. So just a few conclusions that I came up with that you might disagree with, and that's okay. Um, there is absolute empirical evidence that supports the argument that racial discrimination does exist in appraisal practice. And for whether we like it or not, some of that is the way that we do our work, and I'm sure most of it is not intentional, but there is absolute empirical evidence. Um, and more importantly, I think, is that appraisers um, sorry, um, appraisers, my phone keeps going. Appraisers should be open to discussing and recognize traditional appraisal practice and potentially enforcement, and that these things could change. I think we have to look at that. Got to be open to it. It's like open to the forms changing, or I think we have to recognize there may be changes, that things are not always the same. And I think of this, if you were a computer programmer, back in 1970, you'd be working on an old, a completely different computer, program to what people are now. Things change, and really, very little has changed for us, except for the fact we use online data, and we use, we're not sticking, arrows on a page anymore, or using the 1 hour photo people. But the basic process, the way we go about things, we go out, inspect the property, measure it, take all the notes, and then we go around and we drive our comps and we take pictures of them. Then we come back to the office and we fill out a form. So we don't stick the photos on or scratch off the arrows anymore, but we're doing about the same thing as we've always done. And the problem is that I think that people are saying, hey, we need to make some changes to that. Um, Another really important thing to realize is that lenders and borrowers are keenly aware of the potential for discrimination. This has now come to the forefront. So be aware that people out there, they know about it. And there is no, as I said, an overdue need for modernization of our industry. Um, and I think that can only happen with increased diversity. We have to be able to better match the American population with our who our appraisers are. And the users of our services are absolutely going to expect that greater diversity. So, I think if I'm going to make any any conclusion out of what I've seen, it's really that the hope that appraisers can be open and understand that this is something their profession is being looked at. um, our lenders have a lot of clout and power, um, and it may not be my credit unions that I work for, but you think of the JP Morgan Chases and the Bank of Americas and who, whoever, and these guys have some major influences, and they're going to be looking for solutions on the appraisal side. And they are also going to be very keenly aware of race and racial impacts. I think it was Bank of America who just agreed to commit to investing millions of dollars in Black businesses. So, this is something that is there, and we're going to see, and is going to impact our profession. So, with that said, thank you very much for joining us. And this is my email address. I'm just going to see, sometimes people add a few notes. I might have one. And that was Lendl, and he is fine. But I really appreciate everybody being on this webinar and coming to us and for it. And I know it's not one that makes people altogether comfortable, but hopefully there's something that you guys learned. If any of you want links or copies of any of the research that I talked about, I do have that. I know I sent out this week some links on that comparative study, so you can take a look at it for yourself and put your own city in there and see how that corresponds. My email address is really easy. It's scarruthers@trueunion.net. And I thank you very much for joining us. And if we very much appreciate you guys working for us. And I really hope I have not offended anybody. I really tried not to. I just wanted to make sure that you had the information. So thank you very much, and we'll talk next time.